Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and I'm back for the second week of the Three Rivers Challenge Summer Edition. And I sat down on Sunday to do some meal planning and kind of make a plan for the week and what I wanted to do. As with all of my meal videos, we're going to show some very simple, no fancy recipes here. It's all simple meals with an effort to decrease food waste and use up the things that we have in our pantry. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm already deviating from my meal plan. We woke up on Monday morning and I realized that I had some leftovers in the fridge that I wanted to turn into a breakfast casserole. So I just greased up my pan. I had this leftover rice from a meal over the weekend, and I typically make a breakfast casserole using leftover potatoes, but we're out of potatoes in the house and I haven't been making any. And I thought, you know what? I think rice will serve the same purpose. I want to get this rice out of the fridge. So let's go ahead and start our breakfast casserole with a layer of this rice. The next layer in my casserole is always meat, and I'll use any kind of meat that I have left over in the fridge. Taco meat, ground meat, bacon, pork, you name it. I had some grilled pork chops from Sunday night, and it wasn't enough really for a full meal for my family. And so I needed a way to use these up to make a meal, and I thought that in addition to some eggs, this would create enough protein for a breakfast meal. So I'm just kind of chopping up the pork chops. The meat that is left on the bones, Adam likes to snack on that, so putting those bones back in the bag for Adam to pull out and snack on. And then I just have some scrambled eggs here. I put some salt and pepper in there. And we're just going to pour those scrambled eggs over the top of our rice and our meat. That meat was seasoned when I grilled it, so there's enough flavor in there. And we're going to get that in the oven. But first, I want to make some carbohydrates, something that was my savory. The breakfast casserole was my savory. Now I want to make something sweet for the kids to go with it. So I also had this container of leftover oatmeal. Also not enough to make a full meal, but we're going to turn it into an oatmeal bake. So I added a little bit of almond milk to that leftover oatmeal. Now we're going to add some eggs to help kind of solidify the bake and hold it all together. I'm sprinkling in some cinnamon. The oatmeal already had some sweetener and cinnamon in it, but I'm adding a little more flavor. So some cinnamon, some vanilla extract, and then I have a half pint here of apple butter. I have tons of apple butter on the shelf that I need to use up, and I thought that this would really give some good flavor and kind of bulk up this oatmeal bake, and it ended up being really delicious. So now I just need to kind of blend all of that together, and we're going to get this into a greased dish, and we're going to bake it right alongside our breakfast casserole, and we'll have a savory option for the children, and we will also have a sweet option. So I love making meals like this. When leftovers start to pile up in the fridge, I love the challenge of trying to figure out how can I incorporate those into a new meal so that they don't go to waste. And that's part of what I love about doing a pantry challenge, is the opportunity to really intentionally focus on doing that. So those baked for about 40 minutes together, and they turned out wonderful. So a great way to use up some stuff in the fridge. I was very pleased with this, and the children loved the meal. They ate it up just like it wasn't made of leftovers, like it was a brand new item that they'd never eaten before. So that is what it looked like on the plate. I did notice that the kids were very hungry starting out, so I cut the oatmeal bake right away, and it was still kind of soft, but if I had let that sit for another 10 or 15 minutes, it would have hardened a little more and was a little easier to get out of the pan. But I had to get these hungry bellies filled. They were waiting and wanting their breakfast, so we just went ahead and ate it while it was still a little wet. So everybody loved that. Okay, now it's time for lunch. I have some chicken breasts here that I sprinkled with Montreal steak seasoning. We're just going to bake these in the oven to use to make a chicken salad for lunch. While my chicken is baking, we're going to head out to the garden and pick some greens and other veggies to add to our salad. So our lettuce is still going strong. It hasn't bolted yet, despite lack of rain and really, really hot temperatures here in Ohio. Very grateful we still have the lettuce. Searching through our last little patch of radishes that is growing for some decent-sized bulbs here. And I found a couple. We just need maybe 3 decent-sized radishes to chop up and garnish our salad with. And so I found them Once again, our radishes did great this year. I'm very satisfied with the results of my radish harvest. And then I'm just taking a moment to walk around the garden, see what else I would like to add to our salad. I do know that we have lots of green onions growing from our bulb onions, so grabbed a few of those to add. And then we're going to head back inside and put all of this together for lunch. So my chicken breasts are done cooking, and I'm just going to chop these up. I'm going to use half of these for this chicken salad for lunch, and I'm going to save the other half of the chicken for another lunch later on in the week. So it was great to get 2 meals out of this, since we're going to kind of bulk up the chicken salad with other things. My children aren't huge fans of adding a lot to their chicken salad. I know there's some fancy recipes out there that will include things like grapes and nuts, and my children won't, especially my little ones, won't eat it if I add a lot of things like that. So I tend to keep my chicken salad very simple. It's very close to how I make my tuna salad that I showed you in last week's video. So nothing complicated here, just making it so that I know my kids will eat it. As always, saving the broth from that chicken. I spilled a little and made a mess, but that broth will be used to make some rice later on in the week. We don't let anything go to waste. There's good fat and flavor in that. So adding some mayonnaise to the chicken, and then we're also going to get out the rest of a jar of sweet relish, home canned sweet relish that we used in our tuna salad last week. I'm going to use the rest in this week, adding some salt, and that's just about it. We're going to get this mixed together. I do have one other ingredient that I like to add to my chicken salad, and that is the juice from home canned pickled peppers. It just gives a little bit of a kick, a little bit of a spicy flavor that just kind of, I think, gives it that extra, I don't know, special taste. So I added a little bit of that there, and we'll mix that in together, and that makes a good chicken salad that I know my kids will eat. And that's what it's all about. I want to make meals that I know they'll eat, not make anything too complicated that will turn them off to the food. So we have our salad, we have our chicken salad, we have a couple quarts of home canned peaches there, and just a simple little meal. The kids can eat it however they'd like. Some of the little ones like to grab a couple crackers and scoop up their chicken salad and eat it on the crackers. A lot of the older children prefer to just mix their chicken in with the lettuce. That's how I eat it too. And everybody has an option here, and they're all happy with this lunch. Okay, moving on to dinner. We are going to have hamburgers, but I don't have hamburger buns in the house. We're going to make some from scratch. So I'm just grinding down my flour. I'm taking my whole wheat berries and putting them in my grinder, and then we're going to sift out the bran and the germ to get what would be kind of like an all-purpose flour, so that I have a little bit of a softer dough for my bread here. We're using just a basic bread recipe for these hamburger buns, getting that yeast activated here in some water. And this is how my flour turned out after I sifted it. Just beautiful, fresh flour. Freshly ground flour is much more nutritious than pre-ground flour that you can get in the store. So it's a great way to kind of bulk up on the nutrition in the meal. So we have our yeast mixture ready. We're going to add our other ingredients. I put the flour in. I'm adding my olive oil. We add a little bit of salt, and that is it. It's really simple, and I let my mixer, I have a Bosch mixer here, and I'm letting it do the work for me. It's going to knead my dough, get it all mixed together while I move on to a different task. So my dough's all ready. I'm going to get it in a bowl and let it rise for about an hour, and then we'll punch it down. We'll form it into our hamburger patties, let it rise again, and then we'll get those baking. In the meantime, I need to work on making my hamburger patties. Since I have radishes in the fridge that I harvested from the garden that I need to use, we're going to go ahead and chop those up. Sometimes I like to add a little filler like that to my hamburger patties. If not radishes, I like to go get green onions, scallions from the garden, maybe some fresh herbs. Just gives the burgers a little bit extra bulk. And then I'm adding Montreal steak seasoning to the meat. We're going to mix that all together, and then we're going to make our patties. You may be wondering, for a family our size, this is 5 pounds of beef, and that will make enough for most of us to only have one burger, and some of the older children will have 2 burgers. My teenage boys, 1 burger won't fill them up. So it takes a lot of ground beef to feed a family of our size. There are 9 of us eating. And so we're reaching the point where I should probably start using 6 or 7 pounds of meat for a meal like this. But then it's all about space, the space I have on the stove here in my pan to cook them. I would have to do it in double batches. So this is what the burgers look like. I decided not to grill them and to do them inside because it was a little cooler this week than it was last week. By midweek, we had temperatures down in the high 70s versus in the 90s last week, so that was wonderful. Just have some frozen and canned veggies that I mixed together there. We're warming up on the stove, and then our buns are done. Everybody gets a hamburger. We have some fresh lettuce from the garden, the veggies, a pickle, just a simple little hamburger meal. Always a hit. And as I mentioned, if it had been hotter out, I wouldn't have wanted to put the heat in the kitchen, and we would have grilled these outside, and I could fit way more burgers on the grill than I can inside on the stove. But I decided not to grill, and it ended up being enough. Everybody was full. Little Levi, the burger's so big he can't even get it in his mouth. He's trying to figure out how to eat it. I thought that was cute. All right, on to the next breakfast. I have this butternut squash powder that I freeze dried and powdered up from butternut squash last fall, and we need to get this used up. So I'm filling up a quart jar halfway with about 2 cups of the powder, and I'm rehydrating it with almond milk. The great thing about rehydrating freeze-dried powders is that you can boost the nutrition by rehydrating it with things other than water. So I'm using almond milk today. Sometimes I'll use a fruit juice, and it just adds some extra calories and nutrition. It doesn't take long for it to rehydrate, about a half an hour, 40 minutes, and it was ready to go. So I have about 7 cups of fresh ground flour here in the bowl, and I'm going to add 8 teaspoons of baking powder. We are doing 4 dozen pumpkin muffins, but I'm actually going to put them in a pan. I did 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, and we're also going to do 2 teaspoons of nutmeg. If I had cloves on hand, I might do a couple teaspoons of that. We also added a couple teaspoons of salt. I'm going to add 3 cups of sugar. Remember, that is for 4 dozen muffins. And then we're going to get all of those dried ingredients mixed together before we start adding our wet ingredients. 4 dozen muffins is usually enough for us to have for one breakfast, and then there'll be some leftovers to eat with a lunch or as a dessert with dinner later. Now we're going to add 2 cups of olive oil. You could use any kind of fat you wanted. Then we're going to add our eggs to the mix. We have 8 eggs going into this. And then this is that 4 cups of rehydrated butternut squash powder. My recipe is for pumpkin muffins. You can substitute butternut squash in any recipe that uses pumpkin, pureed pumpkin, and it tastes exactly the same. You can't tell the difference. And often, if you're purchasing your butternut squash puree from the store, butternut squash is cheaper. So that's a way to save a few bucks there. We're going to split our batter. Remember, this was muffin batter, but I'm putting it in a pan just for ease of cleaning up. I put half of it into a pan plain like this, and the other half I'm going to sprinkle chocolate chips on the top of it. I have one child who just doesn't like chocolate, and so I prefer to do both options so everybody has something they like. We're going to bake that on 350 for a while, and while it's baking, I am working on making some scrambled eggs. I'm sorry I don't have a time on how long it takes to bake those. It just sort of depends on how deep your dish is. So you just use a toothpick in the center to determine when that muffin batter is done baking. We've got our scrambled eggs. We've got our little muffin cakes, I guess you would call it. And another hit. Everybody loved this so much. I made this on Tuesday. They asked for it again on Friday. And I made the same thing again for another breakfast this week. All right, let's move on to dinner on that day. It was a Tuesday. We always have Taco Tuesday throughout the week when we have supplies on hand to do that. And I decided to use my camp stove outside to cook our tacos just to keep the mess out there. And I had the time to do it outside. And so that's really convenient. I will link my camp stove and griddle in the video description. If you're looking at getting one, I highly recommend mine. So I've just got my meat out here, and my tortillas cooking. Little Hannah is along for the ride on my back. She's safe back there away from the heat of the stove. I have some garlic scapes that I harvested and some onions that I'm cooking. We're going to have some cumin and some paprika. We're going to add it to our meat here. This is ground pork, and that's going to give it that taco flavoring. As I mentioned, I have onions and I have some garlic scapes that we harvested that we're going to put on topping as toppings. Elizabeth went out to the garden. She also cut me some lettuce to use as a topping, and we're just having a little taco night. It's pretty simple, nothing fancy. We have our corn tortillas, our meat, our lettuce, our onions and garlic. We have some home canned corn relish, taco sauce, and some salsa there. And everybody, oh, Hannah fell asleep while we were cooking, which was a blessing because she was asleep on my back and I was able to eat my dinner without having to hold her in front of me, which is always really nice. So this is what my plate of tacos looked like. Looking delicious. Everybody kind of makes them differently, and we love having Taco Tuesday here in our house. It's the next morning. We're going to go ahead and use that camp stove again. I've got some bacon out, and as soon as I got it out, I had an audience. Imagine that. The 3 dogs were on the other side of the property, and as soon as they started smelling that bacon, they were right at my side, just begging me, and how can you resist these cute faces that wanted a little bacon treat? So gives new meaning to those commercials about bacon strips with the dogs. That's what it reminded me of. So anyways, for this breakfast, we're just working on cooking up some bacon. And I had leftover tortillas from the night before, not a ton of them, but enough for everybody to have 1 or 2 with their breakfast. So we're just kind of warming those up again on the stove. Once the griddle was all greased up from the bacon, I added some eggs. We're going to scramble those up and have some breakfast burritos since we have a lot of the fixings and everything all ready to go from the night before. We're just going to kind of repurpose everything into a breakfast meal. And once again, using the griddle to cook breakfast for this many people is so convenient. I can do a lot more at one time in terms of like bacon when I'm outside. I got some more radishes and lettuce from the garden. We're going to use those as our garnish. The children are very excited in particular about the bacon. They came running just like the dogs when they smelled it. So here's everything we have ready. We'll also have some salsa and taco sauce. And the kids, just like with a dinner burrito or taco, they are putting together a little breakfast version. This would be great with cheese, but once again, we are a dairy-free family because of an anaphylactic allergy, so we can't do cheese here. All right, another meal of a lunch on this day using leftovers. Here's the rest of that baked chicken. I'm going to make an Italian dressing. I've shown you guys this before, how I make it, but I have this little container that makes the dressing for you and shows you how much vinegar, water, and oil to add, and it works great. So I'm going to go ahead and put this together using the ingredients that I have back there. This is some homemade apple scrap vinegar. You guys often ask how I use that, and one of the main ways is in salad dressing. Next, we filled it with water to the appropriate line. Then I'm going to fill it with my olive oil. Then for our Italian seasoning, I've shown you guys this before. I buy it in bulk from Azure Standard. They have an Italian dressing mix. And one day maybe I'll work on making this myself, but it's just so convenient to buy it at a great price from Azure. And it works well in this season of life. So we just add about 3 teaspoons of that, mix it all together here, and I have a perfect little Italian dressing to go with our pasta salad. That's what I'm making for this particular lunch. So I got to get my pasta boiling. This is just regular spaghetti noodles. I have them on the stove. I added those leftover veggies, the leftover chicken, and I poured that whole bottle of Italian dressing over the noodles, a little bit of extra salt and pepper. We just have a little pasta salad. It's a nice break from a tomato-based pasta. The kids really like this. So that is what it looked like all put together. Just portioned it out into the bowls, and many of the children go back for seconds until it's all eaten up. All right, let's move on to breakfast the next day. I decided I'm going to make something, I guess I'm going to consider it a custard. I have 16 eggs here in this bowl. We have 2 quarts of peach pie filling that I canned last summer that I'm working on using up. Just half a can of organic coconut cream that was in the fridge that I thought I would add to this just to get it out of the fridge. And then we have just a little bit of fresh ground flour from the day before that I want to use. And we're just going to add all of this together and make, I guess, what I'll consider a custard. That's why it's really hard for me to often provide you guys with recipes, because a lot of what I do in the kitchen is just experimenting like this, and it's really fun to challenge yourself to just see what kind of meals you can come up with. A lot of baked dishes, as long as you add a little egg, you add something sweet, you add a little bit of flour, you bake it, it's going to turn out great. And that's what I figured. So we're calling this a peach pie custard. I'm just going to grease my pan really well so that it doesn't stick. And I use lard to grease my pans. We're going to pour that batter in, and I baked it on 400 degrees once again until the middle firmed up. Decided to make some juice to go with breakfast. So we have a quart here of home canned cranberry juice. I'm going to strain out those cranberries. Sometimes I use these berries to turn them into something else, but on this day they're just going to go in the chicken bucket, and the chickens will enjoy eating those berries. Next, I'm adding a quart of grape juice. This is grape juice that didn't contain the grapes. It was a concentrated grape juice, so it's super sweet. We're going to put that in there. Because it was super sweet, I didn't need to add sugar to this batch. We're just going to mix it together, and then the children can have a small cup of this with their custard for breakfast. So this is what that looked like after it baked. It definitely had a custardy texture to it. I'm going to pull that out and show you guys what the inside was like. Once again, children were really hungry, so I'm serving it hot, but this is the kind of thing that if you sat and let it cool for about 15 minutes, it does harden up a little bit and it's easier to serve. But my children aren't picky, and they don't care that it comes out looking a little messier. They just want to eat right away. They are hungry. And this one was a good one. They said, "Mom, make this again. Can you replicate it and do it again?" And so I will try again sometime soon. For dinner, I'm using, this is one of my favorite cookbooks, Hope's Table. I'm going to link it in the description for you. Hope is a friend of mine on Instagram. She's just a wonderful cook. If there were anyone whose house I ever wanted to eat at, it would be Hope's, because her meals always look so amazing. So I'm making the coleslaw recipe from her cookbook. Just shredding up some cabbage there. We like ours shredded up a little bigger and not so finely. And then I'm grating a carrot into the cabbage. This is just a basic, I love her recipes because they're very simple with ingredients that you have on hand. And you guys know me, that's how I like to cook. So I added a half a cup of mayonnaise, a half a cup of olive oil, a third a cup of apple scrap vinegar, about a tablespoon of mustard. I did skip a few things in the recipe. She had grated onion in it and I left it out. I added the sugar, the salt, and you can see the recipe by going to her Instagram page or purchasing her cookbook. We're going to get that all mixed together. I did it a little earlier in the day so that this could sit in the fridge and all those flavors could mix together and be ready for dinner time. So getting that mixed, we're going to put that in the fridge. And then later on, I am grilling meat. I have been loving grilling. Look at the house behind me where we tore the deck off. We're going to ignore that. Anyways, we still need to fix where the deck was, but grilling meat, we have steaks and pork chops on the grill, and we've been grilling out multiple times a week and just really enjoying it in this weather. So we have our steaks, our pork chops, some canned peaches once again, and our coleslaw. Perfect summer dinner. This is my favorite way to eat in the summer. I love food like this. And I know Adam does too. All right, on to the next meal. My pea pods are just starting to produce. I don't have a ton to harvest, but I had enough to go out and pull some little baby immature ones for a lunch snack, along with some more radishes. As I mentioned, I'm working on the last bit of radishes in this patch before we're going to have to wait until fall for more radishes. I'm steaming some of our eggs that I had just harvested that morning. Always fun to try to peel fresh, farm fresh eggs that were just laid that day. But if I steam them, I get a little better results than boiling them. So that's what I did. And you can see not all of them turned out perfect, but it gets the job done. We have our little snacks here, leftover coleslaw, some applesauce, and some leftover pumpkin bread from the second time I made it this week. My girls were away with their grandparents and cousins, so I just had my boys to eat lunch for this day. That's why it's a little smaller than it normally is, because there were 2 less children eating on this day. Now it's time for dinner. I have a pint here of home canned peach salsa. It's the last of the peach salsa, and my favorite way to use peach salsa is on pork roasts. And I had a very busy day, so I decided to do roasts in the oven just to kind of get it in earlier in the day so that it would cook while I was busy. This is what it looked like later in the day, pulling those roasts out to get them shredded up. But I never waste the drippings from my roasts, especially with all of that wonderful peach salsa flavor in there. We're going to pour that over some rice and then fill it the rest of the way with water, and we're going to get that rice cooking on the stove for dinner, and it will have such wonderful flavor from the fat of this roast with all of the peach and jalapeno flavors in there too. So that is how our rice looked. I just opened a bag of frozen stir-fry veggies and warmed them up. And then we have our shredded pork back there, some condiments, some soy sauce, and coconut aminos. Just a really simple dinner on a busy day that's nourishing, that filled bellies and got the job done. And our final meal, I am making a breakfast. I'm going to make some banana bread. I have sugar, 2 cups of sugar in the bottom of the bowl. I added my olive oil, 1 cup of olive oil. I added 2 eggs, and we're mixing all of that together. We're going to make a banana bread. I don't make it often because my daughter, Gracie, doesn't like bananas. They kind of make her stomach not feel good. And so I'm making it while she is gone with our grandparents, and it worked out perfectly. I put in 4 cups of fresh ground flour. It worked out perfectly because I had bananas on hand that were at the perfect stage for making banana bread. I added a teaspoon of salt there, and now we are going to add some baking soda. We're going to do 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. Get that all mixed together. And then we're going to add those bananas. It just worked out that I had 3 bananas that were at this stage and needed to be used. And my recipe calls for 3 mashed bananas. So this was just great. A blessing that I could use these up while my daughter, who doesn't like it, was out of the house. So just going to get those bananas mashed into there, get everything all mixed up. And this is going to be our banana bread. But once again, I'm going to make our banana bread, instead of putting it into 2 separate loaf pans that then I would have 2 dishes to clean, I'm just going to put it into one 9x13 pan. You guys know I really like to do this. I like to work smarter, not harder, so it's easier for me to wash one pan than it is to do 2 separate items. So we're just going to grease that up. And then once again, it makes your cooking times a little different because instead of using a loaf, you're using a larger pan. So we just put this in the oven on 350, and it baked until the center was done. So we just use a toothpick and check on it. I think this took about 40 minutes. So this is what it looked like. Because I greased it so well, I could just flip the pan over upside down and it fell right out. Slice it into some little pieces like this. And as it cools, then we'll have like little bread pieces in this way that the children can pick up and eat. So that was the breakfast that we had on Saturday morning with some scrambled eggs, and everybody seemed to enjoy it. So hopefully you enjoyed this week of meals. Like I said, nothing fancy here. We're just trying to use up items that we have in the pantry. We're trying to utilize what we have growing in the garden fresh, which isn't a lot this time of year, but it's going to start amping up toward the middle of the month. And I hope that you gained some inspiration and some courage to experiment in your own kitchen. All right, guys, we'll see you on Wednesday with another video. Until then, have a blessed week. Bye, friends.